Hello, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed lunch. My name is Sai Chowdhury. I run product management for web technologies here at Qualcomm, and I'm looking forward to, obviously, this session. It's about web technologies, both where we are here today and in the very near and immediate future. A bit of housekeeping notes, because we didn't get a chance to review this a little bit earlier. The session evals this year are online, and they can be accessed, of course, through PC or your mobile. Please do fill them out. I know they're a bit of a pain, but they're very important for us to get feedback on how we need to evolve Uplinq to make so that it's valued for you. Some prizes that we're going to give away to try to incentivize you include $300 Amazon gift cards every day. You can probably help defray your smartphone purchase cost with that. And one $500 Amazon gift card for the entire session, or for the entire Uplinq. So please do that. A quick reminder that the Mobile Innovation Showcase is downstairs till 7 o'clock, and including a welcome reception, free booze, from 5:30 to 7. That's always good. And speaking about free booze, obviously, any of you who have flights tomorrow evening, please change them, because it will be a fun party tomorrow, the Q on 5th. I'll write you a handwritten note if you need that it's part of the event. There's going to be some quiz afterwards, etc. The session that we're going to have here today, the format is a conversation for 45 minutes. It's supposed to be a fireside chat, so I'm looking for the fireplace. If you guys find it, let me know, because these plants don't actually look they look quite flammable, to tell you the truth. So it's a 45-minute chat here, followed by Q&A. So please do queue up any good questions that you have. We do want this to be interactive and continue that conversation that way. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce you to the two folks that are going to be up here. The first is Rob Chandhok. Rob is a senior vice president at Qualcomm. He actually has quite a few hats. His main role where I work with him in is as running product management for software and strategy for QCT, our chipset business. He also is the president of our Qualcomm Innovation Center, our open source subsidiary, and the activities we're doing there, as well as president of Qualcomm Internet Services, QIS. So he brings a lot of different input and background into this topic around where applications and web technologies are moving. And so pretty exciting times here. Up here with him will be Ben Wood. Ben is a research director at CCS Insight. I think many of you probably have heard or actually worked with their data. They're very, very influential. Ben is also a co-owner of CCS Insight and lives in London and works with the team on a global basis. One of the most interesting things that I learned this week is that Ben was voted one of the top 50 most influential people on the Mobile Power 50. And with 17 years of experience, I can understand why, especially after having talked to him over the years myself. So without further ado, let's get Ben and Rob, if you could come up here, and for your, not fireside, fernside chat.
Nice haircut, by the way. Okay, so wait, I took off my jacket.
Yeah.
And then you put yours back on.
I'm sorry.
Nice.
There we go.
Punked again.
Absolutely. Well, you got the seat you wanted, right?
That's right.
So we're all good. Anyway, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. As I think you all know, what we're talking about today is the role that HTML5 is going to play in the future. And it's great to have Rob here. Looking at what Rob's been doing, of course, very influential in the work that he did previously in Brew. But I think now you have this challenge of bringing together this kind of what I call the holy trinity of hardware, software, and services. And Paul talked a lot about that in his keynote this morning in terms of this Blender stuff. But the role that the web's going to play, we see today a lot of native applications, but it strikes me with the new emerging web technologies, particularly HTML, that there's an opportunity for the web to play a much bigger role in the application space. So how do you see that manifesting itself in the marketplace right now?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, as I listen to you ask the question, I think about web and the application space. If we weren't talking about the mobile world, we wouldn't break those two things apart at all, because the world of consumer services in the traditional compute desktop paradigm is the web, right? Because where else can you change your application, publish it, and get it out there to all those people? Can you imagine how Facebook would have spread is every time Facebook wanted to change their user interface, you had to download a new web page on your laptop. It just wouldn't have taken off the same way. So one of the things that we see is this as we get the computing capabilities, the increased graphics capabilities, we have more things that we can do. For example, we've shown multiple video streams on mobile devices. As you get to that parity on the mobile device, then what is the difference between a native quote-unquote application and one that's written in JavaScript and HTML5? And that seems to be blurring more and more to us.
And I think this blurring is important. I mean, how can developers focus on that? If you've got a web-centric background, there's obviously a big opportunity here right now. If you can take the skill set that you've got and port it across to mobile, and what advice would you give people who are trying to do that sort of thing?
Well, one thing is that you really need to look at really hard at what HTML5 actually brought to the table, because a couple of the features in HTML5, I think, were that tipping point from being able to make a mobile web application have that kind of experience that you want to drive in a mobile device. For example, one of the things that's in HTML5 is the ability to store data locally. And so in a mobile device, by its very nature, you have connectivity that is in all likelihood intermittent. You know, the example we had talked about before was I get on the plane, I still want to be able to use that application even if I have all the wireless connectivity off on my device. So you can build now in HTML5 applications that can store that data. You can take Gmail and actually read your email on the plane even though it's running in a browser. So that kind of focus on what's the experience going to be both connected and disconnected that you can leverage with HTML5, that's one of the examples that I would ask a developer to follow.
And that kind of transparency, we're looking at, as I said, a very native-centric approach to applications right now. What are you doing at Qualcomm to facilitate this move towards the more web-centric HTML5 approach to development?
Right. So the first piece we generally talk about is just making it fast enough so you don't notice whether or not it's running in JavaScript or running natively. So we've been working a lot, in particular with the V8 code base, and we've actually been speeding that up a lot, making sure that it runs better on ARM, making sure it really runs better on a Snapdragon processor family. And then from there, we're actually trying to integrate those features of the device that people expect to have in a native application. Paul showed in his keynote that demonstration of what if we expose the camera API, right? Because if you remember, before in HTML, you didn't even think about location, and actually having web-based applications know about location, that's just the first step in opening up those same native APIs, and I think you're going to see a lot of movement in that area.
So you talked a bit about the hardware. Obviously, with a native app, it's quite clear that sometimes you can get into those APIs. If you go down the web route, what are you guys doing to help people think about optimizing their experience on the hardware? Do they even need to worry about it? Is it going to be a big deal in the future?
Yeah, I'm not sure you can ever be a developer and not worry about optimization just because the world is an imperfect place. But we're trying to make it so that across a wide variety of platforms that we enable this functionality. So, for example, we're pushing very hard to make sure that WebGL is enabled very well, because not only does that give you the ability to show and basically a great UI of 3D graphics, and you can use it in your UI elements, do the animations, the transitions, but on a mobile device, you want to be able to do that actually and not consume very much power. And with the hardware accelerators we have for GL, exposing that through JavaScript, through this WebGL standard API, lets application developers actually build something that, in all honesty, if it didn't have that frame around it, you wouldn't be able to distinguish it from a native application.
So, because WebGL is interesting, because of course, HTML5, a lot because of Steve Jobs and the whole, anti-flash thing he seems to have going on, and then the role that he saw HTML5 as a solution for video. If you've got those kind of video optimization capabilities, and Paul alluded to that as well, how are developers going to harness that? What's going to be different now with those capabilities?
Well, I mean, we're trying to do that in two ways. We're really pushing the HTML5 video, so the video tag in HTML is actually going to be directly tied to the hardware acceleration blocks of our video engines, so that you can run multiple video streams and get that behavior that you expect. But we're also working with Adobe and making sure that Flash also runs on top of all these platforms, because the fact of the matter is there's a lot of Flash content out there on the web, and the full internet still looks like it needs Flash. So we, in fact, just today, I believe, announced that we actually made Flash enabled on a mass market version of our chipsets, the 7227. I know you guys love it when I quote MSM part numbers. We can roll dice later, and you can ask me if this stuff works good on that part number. But for us, it was a really big deal because we took Flash actually down into a mass market tier that we had never taken it before. So bringing that kind of what you think of as sort of base level functionality for building this rich ecosystem out and bringing it to mass market in your hand, in your pocket devices is something that we take the responsibility for as a platform company so that the people who write in Flash and write in HTML5, the application developers, can innovate at that level.
So it's interesting you bring up some of these more like cost-constrained devices. You know, we're seeing this trend now. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible in Europe. We're seeing these, you know, sub $100 or even less Android smartphones coming to market. How are you going to trade off that experience? Because, of course, you've got challenges on the processing capability, on the memory, on the footprint of the device, those sorts of things. If you go down the web route for application development, is that going to be difficult on those devices?
I don't think so. If you really think about a device that's running a Linux kernel and a couple things on top, but WebKit isn't, well, it's a big piece of code. It's not bigger than everything else. And, you know, think about, actually, I'm sitting here, we're having this debate a little bit when we're dancing around the Android native applications. I mean, let's remember, Dalvik is actually an interpreted, you know, language also, or interpreted environment also. So those two environments aren't that different from each other in weight. What's different about them is the ecosystem around how you present, monetize, and transact business in the mobile web isn't to the same place that we are with the other marketplaces. So we've tied together these two things. So in the mass market, I think we're going to have the compute capabilities that you're talking about. So I think that's going to spread very, very quickly. And I don't think that's going to be the boundary. I think it's really going to boil down to, am I delivering applications that require data? And I think you'd be hard-pressed to say, okay, one of the differences between native apps and web apps is the amount of data that you consume. I think most interesting native applications or applications in the marketplace actually do use a lot of data in order to be useful. So I think that distinction will blur too.
But if you've got a constrained pipe, I mean, how does the browser play a role there? Because, you know, that's going to be pretty hard if you're trying to deliver a rich experience.
I'm not sure that it's harder to deliver a rich experience in that pipe than it is in a quote-unquote native application. That assumes, by the way, that we think about what a mobile web application means. So when I think about it, and we have a bunch of people, and we'd love to hear actually more from developers about what you would like to see in a mobile web application. What's the container going to look like? How am I going to cache and manage that? What can we do intelligently in a generic way? Because if you think about it, I should be able to make a first-class icon on my phone top that is a web application that doesn't have scroll bars and things around it that I don't need in this context and still manage it that way. So I think that it's more of the frameworks have to evolve, and I think the value that you get out of that distribution channel is going to drive the creation of the framework. We've seen some. You've seen Sencha and Sprout Core and a couple other things, and I've seen amazing web-based applications, ones that you really can't tell the difference. But we don't have that sort of methodology down yet, and I think that's something that's going to happen in the industry.
Does it even matter? I mean, I'm assuming, because my vision would be, for the consumer, it should make no difference whether
Absolutely
it's native
not.
or web. And I guess that's the challenge for the development community, which is to embrace that. And let's go to the other end of the spectrum in terms of, you know, connectivity. We're going to have super powerful, you know, HSPA+, 4G networks, those sorts of things, which will have this lower latency. Paul talked about, you know, this sixth sense and the future. How do you see that capability and the ability to author apps in this way shaping the market in the future?
That's a deep question. So let's come back to the comment on the connectivity. I do think that the characteristic of the new 4G networks that have this lower latency is going to change the game a little bit for the web applications also. When we spend a lot of time not only, you know, I've talked a lot about optimizing the graphics and the video and so forth in the browser. The other piece we do is end-to-end think about, I'm going to fetch this content. This is the characteristic of the network. How can I better pipeline and interleave the requests and do that? So one of the things that we're trying to do is as you go across these blended networks, because the thing about, you can talk about LTE and HSPA+, but they're not ubiquitous yet. So you have to work across all these different air interfaces all the time. Balance between Wi-Fi and cellular as I move around and because I'm a mobile device. We're trying to build that into our platform with smart connection management and actually push that all the way up into the browser. So for example, if I'm streaming video and I get into a certain situation, I can react faster in the guts of WebKit and how it's enabled on our chipsets. And so the developers that are using these capabilities don't have to spend their time worrying about, is the video going to play? They can do all the other cool things in their application that they would put around it.
And Paul talked about this web tech optimization. So there's obviously a lot going on inside Qualcomm in terms of taking the different layers and peeling them back and really trying to make it work nicely between the software and the hardware layers.
Right.
Again, is that something that developers need to worry about, or does it just work? Do you just write the apps and they're going to take advantage of those new capabilities?
I think for the most part, probably the 80% of the developers, it'll just work. And then I think there are going to be people that have to think a little bit harder because their apps are going to be more complex or more constrained, and they're going to push the limits a little bit more. But I think that's true of sort of any application environment.
But you're working on some new APIs, as I understand it. So I mean, how do they fit in with this? You're pushing down to some specific capabilities.
Right. So that's sort of where we fall back into the discussion about the device APIs and so forth. So we think camera, access to the codecs, access to the more of what's going on the chip itself to accelerate what's going in the browser is something that's going to be really important so that you can have that difference. We're playing around with things where in your web application you can have access to peer-to-peer Bluetooth, for example. I think we've got that demo running downstairs where you can actually share photographs between two web pages or web applications by phones that are near each other using the all-join framework. So we can think of as a community, as a platform company, and as basically the general web community, think about what a mobile web application means, and it's going to include some sort of standardization around what kinds of APIs are going to be useful. Because if it's just on one phone, it could be cool for a while, but it won't scale the way all of us want our applications and our ecosystem to scale.
And tell me a little bit, Sai referred, because you have this multiple hats that you wear in your role, he talked about your open source activities. So clearly that's got to be a cornerstone of the work you're doing to open this up. Because it's, I know you're going to tell me that it's all optimized magnificently for Snapdragon, but of course you need it all to work across the board. You need the buy-in from other people. So how are you working with partners to bring the kind of HTML5 experience on mobile to life?
Well, I mean, I think the way you do it in the open source community is by doing it and actually delivering value. So one of the things we did is we took V8 and we said, hey, you know what? We think you can handle floating point a lot better in an ARM architecture versus an x86 architecture. So here's the optimizations that we're going to do. And by the way, those optimizations, they worked on other people's chips also. But that's the nature of it. We want the whole ecosystem to rise up so that we can do new things and not concentrate on whether or not I can add numbers fast enough. Right? I think we're trying to be past that.
So when do you think web apps will overtake native apps? Because there's been a lot of speculation. We made some predictions on this and we keep getting it wrong. But I mean, to me, it seems like the logical way to go, right? It gives you a lot more versatility. You can port it onto more platforms. But there still seems to be a resistance because of this very compartmentalized approach that Apple have kind of educated the market towards.
Well, I mean, part of me wants to argue that web apps and mobile are already here. I mean, one of the interesting things that we saw go by recently is there was some work that was done to look at how people are updating Facebook, and one of the things that we discovered is that it's not the Facebook mobile applications that are providing most of the content, it's actually m.facebook.com is actually driving 90% of the traffic. So the mobile web application is here. What I think is missing from that ecosystem is the discovery and monetization parts that marketplaces add. So what's going to be the equivalent of that kind of mechanism, that monetization, and so forth. So that's, when I think of a web application framework, I think that's the thing that's going to actually push it to that next level. So the Chrome guys have their viewpoint on it, which I'm not sure I would argue is a mobile-specific viewpoint, but you can go to the Chrome store and actually, quote-unquote, buy a web application. Where buying the web application is just buying access to a website, really, that is then embodied in an icon on your desktop. Something like that will probably happen in mobile. I don't have a time for.
But I'd argue the m.facebook experience isn't close. A consumer, I think, would recognize the difference between a dedicated Facebook app and that experience today. What needs to happen? As you said, no scroll bars, no wrappers, no that. How do we get to that point?
Well, the flip side of that, by the way, is the people I know that only use the website on Facebook on their smartphones because half the features on Facebook aren't in the mobile application, right? So you actually go back to the mother truth, right, and say, I'm going to use that. So the things that I'm missing, I think we're still a little bit away from actually being able to to package it. Like for example, it is a little harder and it's a little more clumsy to have that web bookmark be an icon on, and that I get to in the front way. So there needs to be, we need to grease the skids there. And I think a framework would actually help drive that a little bit better. How we package up a web application and how we distribute it. And then the other piece is that we just have to continue to work on extending the capability so that a user interface person that's doing a website can take that style sheet and do a style sheet for the mobile and actually be happy with the results. And I think we're close, implementation-wise, to getting the speed there and the integration into the GPUs, but possibly another year away.
But is there a danger once we start going? Because I mean, it's all kind of rather, a nice vision of the future, but we've seen with web technology that there has been different web tech-based environments like WebOS and Chrome and others, and there's fragmentation in the mobile OSs. How do you stop that fragmentation creeping into the kind of web apps world?
Well, I think HTML is actually the anti-fragmentation, right? Because it runs across all the platforms. We don't want to get back to the place that we were in the 90s where this worked on IE and that worked on Mozilla and this worked, the different browser wars that we had. HTML5 has actually done a pretty good job of up-leveling it to the point where I can be reasonably certain that the things that I'm writing from a web application developer standpoint are going to run across all these rendering engines, these runtimes, actually, that are written by other people, because a bunch of them are written based on WebKit, and that has become a de facto standard in and of itself. And then the ones that aren't based on WebKit follow and agree upon HTML5. So in a lot of ways, I think the thing that's interesting about the web is across, if you think about all these different OSs, like John was talking about WebOS, and it's a very personal thing to have this device in your pocket managing your information. And people are going to, I don't think it's going to go away that there are going to be different user experiences that people are going to drive for that personal information. But for the delivery of the mass consumer services, we actually want, as developers and as publishers, to be able to reach the largest audience possible. And that environment right now is inarguably the web.
So that leads to quite an obvious, I mean, again, going back to the fact that there are tens of millions of web developers out there, I think we've proven the case that they can easily take that skill set and push it onto mobile web apps. But what about other platforms? I mean, connected TVs, that seems to be a web-centric game as well. We hear about the whole connected world, the connecting all sorts of different inanimate objects. How does this play a role in the future?
I mean, the web has already sort of proven itself as being the UI of choice to devices. I mean, I've got 2 or 3 routers at my house where the way I configure them is actually by opening a browser window to them and actually poking on it. It's not that sophisticated, but I can get it to run. I think over time you're going to see higher capability environments being ported so that when I am customizing my television, it's more like me adding bookmarks and rearranging my top level of my browser than it is yet another user interface that I have to learn. It's better to have one that I'm familiar with, I think.
And connected TV, I mean, that's been a theme underlying this event for a while. Everybody's started to look at that. It doesn't look like you're that optimistic about it.
Well, what's not connected? My TV has Ethernet in it, doesn't yours?
It does, but most of my friends do as well, but they never use it.
They never use it. Well,
so they can't figure it out. I mean, we need this.
But that I think is the really good point. That is the place where each television, each manufacturer, each model presents a different interface practically, because we're so early in that part of that consumer electronics cycle. If that were a more familiar model, or a model that I could personalize using tools that I know how to personalize, like what I do on the web, it could actually be pretty interesting.
But there's this kind of utopia. I see these kind of concept videos. I walk into my living room,
no such
and
thing as
the video flies up onto the screen, and it's all working beautifully, and the cloud's got all my content in it. How does that actually come to fruition?
And you go like this, and it knows what you mean.
That's right. My 3-year-old does that to change the channel. It's crazy. It's like, what's
no.
Mr. Jobs
this
done
has
to
changed
us?
the channel. I mean, but that's actually the way I think about that problem is that we have to get to the point where we're not worried about what does the Twitter icon look like on my television? Do I get to it a different way? Do I have to write another application in another language? Do I have to do a DOCSIS compliant Twitter application to get it on my TV? Or could I just get that web browser up there, do what I need to do, and then we can have the arguments about that next level, which is what's the gesture-based UI that we could actually use, right? I talk too much with my hands to have a gesture-based UI because I'd be sitting there talking to my wife at home, and the next thing I know, we'd be on a different channel.
Turn the lights out. Yeah. So, we've touched on some of the elements of HTML5 and what we can do with those, but I'd like to probe a bit deeper on things like context, location, even interacting with things like the accelerometer and those sorts of things. Because I think from what I've read around this, you're doing a lot of work to present those capabilities through a web-based architecture as well.
Right, and I think that the industry is actually trying to figure out what that API set should be and how it should be presented. In the meantime, we're trying to be a little bit standards leading and expose some of those capabilities early so that developers, hopefully, in partnership with our OEM and our partners, can actually get access to these kinds of APIs. We don't have anything particular to announce, but we're demonstrating some of them downstairs, and we're trying to get people to put those into their commercial products so that we can play with web applications that can, for example, tell which way it's tilted, so you can do the same thing in your browser application as you can in a quote-unquote native application.
And going back to this kind of bearer agnostic stuff, Qualcomm's made some interesting acquisitions recently, looking beyond the cellular pipe. And I think that's obviously going to play an important role when we start looking at maybe some of the richer video experiences. People seem to be obsessed with HD video and these sorts of things, which I have serious reservations about. It could be the wrecking ball of the mobile industry if we unleash all this video traffic. But do you see people having to start thinking about how those bearers will work? Or again, can you architect the application so that it's transparent?
I mean, there's no problem. The codec people are working to half the bit rate again, right? So that you can get through and say, I can still provide that quality at a lower bit rate. That's almost an orthogonal problem to what we're talking about. But we are thinking about blending access to both the capital I internet around you, which I would think about the cellular Wi-Fi kind of businesses, and also the world around you, where you might in fact have higher bitrate connectivity. So some of the work we've done, Paul talked a little bit about all-join. When I talk about bringing that peer-to-peer capability into the browser and into the other environments, that might be the place where you start to get these. If you've got this environment for developing applications in the web that can go on multiple devices, and you have a way for those devices to talk to each other, you might build a different system, and you don't have to be this deeply integrated vertical consumer electronics company to do it. You might be able to do a set of partners that actually collaborate around these standards. It's how the internet got to be big, and I think the next big thing for mobile devices is actually peer-to-peer and how we use it.
And I mean, expanding on that a little bit, it goes back to this whole, sixth sense thing that Paul, which I know you didn't answer that question last time, so we'll come back to that in terms of, if you have to look into your crystal ball and look at how you see this interacting, and the role that the web plays in enabling that, what do you anticipate? If we're sitting here in 3 years' time, what are we all going to be jazzed about?
Wow. I thought we were talking about the web.
Oh, we are, but it's going to be fueled by the web, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I see that the web intersects this in a way that it's limited by your imagination in the web app world.
Right.
It's not so much that you have these rigid silos. You can actually go, well, I can pull in stuff from the cloud left, right, and center and weave that into something very special with a web app.
Or mash it up, as it were.
Indeed, yeah.
So I mean, I think that maybe you could key a little bit off of what John also talked about in his session. We said that data is going to be so important to that. And the thing that the web gave us in the services side of the world on the desktop was actually that ability to integrate pieces from multiple places all at the same time, so that I'm looking at, in a lot of ways, that mashup, and if you're above a certain level or use a certain set of tools, I can make that very personal, right? So I don't know where we're going to be in 3 years. That's actually a little far out. Okay. For me to predict, but I do believe we'll get the platforms down to that point where the kind of interchange that we're talking about that happens more to large scale, I think is going to happen more easily between the devices that we ourselves carry. So we're both going to depend on the cloud more because it will be the repository, our backup, it'll be that sorts of information. But we'll also, I think, get the algorithms to a point now where we'll have copies of that data that we can share with people that carry around in the mobile devices and interact with the world around us. Right? So maybe, for example, if I want to put this picture that I want to show you on that picture frame that's above that fireplace, and that it may not live on my phone, right? But I can either get it, cache it, and maybe cache my phone, and I can throw it up there using a peer-to-peer connection. I mean, it hit me in an interesting way that I was walking out. I showed a couple of people this at Qualcomm. Maybe this is off topic or not, but I was actually playing with the Google Music beta, and I had a jam box from the Jawbone guys, and I was sitting there, and I was realizing I was playing this music, and I didn't have a copy of it anywhere on a device that was around me. It was streaming over Wi-Fi, through the phone, out over Bluetooth. This device, I'm walking around with the phone in one hand, the speaker in the other. People are thinking I'm a little bit weird, but I thought it was really cool. So if we get to that point where the data can actually come, and we can create systems that do that, and we can create easier ways. The Aleph guys could do that, or the Jawbone guys could do that because there's a standard for doing stereo audio, right? But to add another profile to Bluetooth is really, really hard. One of the reasons we did all join, for example, and one of the reasons I'm so excited about it is it's more like the internet, is that you can layer different standards or different ways of interacting on top of it much more easily than like adding a Bluetooth profile.
But you make sure you weave that into the HTML5
Absolutely,
kind of extension.
because I don't want HTML5 applications, I don't want web applications to be second-class citizens, right? Because I do think it's a great platform. I don't want to go back to where I was 20 years ago when I used to have to argue with people that it's okay to use C++. It's not going to be that much slower than C. It's really okay for you to do object-oriented. I literally had to give classes on that to middle managers whose engineers were telling them to use this newfangled object-oriented stuff. Well, we're at the same place. We're arguing about native applications where we're actually arguing about Java applications versus JavaScript applications. I'm not sure what the difference is other than the container around the runtime. Right?
And
what did my TV do when I did that? I don't know.
Watch out. But where's the crossover point? Because I've been really intrigued, going back to the Facebook example, on the iPad, they've resisted making an application. Now, part of it might be just because they're resource constrained, but their view is, look, you've got a 10-inch tablet, you might as well just go to the web page, and that's where you're going to get the rich experience. Do you see the ability that this more extensible architecture in an environment makes it possible for better applications to start appearing on tablets as well as the more constrained devices?
Well, actually, that's probably a fair, I can't think of a better example about why the web is such a powerful publishing platform. That was a lot of P words. That there is no reason for Facebook to actually build anything different than their website. The only reason is that we do this on the mobile devices. We seem to think that we can't somehow squeeze that experience into the smaller screens. And I don't think it's just screen size. I think it's that we don't have the other tools in the ecosystem, and a lot of the mobile browsing has been more primitive. This is a full-featured browser. Therefore, I don't have to do anything differently, right? I mean, I've been at companies where if you went to the website, at consumer-facing companies, and we were running a new promotion, you would get one of 8 different offers, and then through the week, we would actually tune that. And so the website actually became a dynamic marketing tool. That's how consumer businesses run these days. If we were trying to emulate that in the mobile environment, I would have to ask 1/8 of the people to re-download the application every day because I'm going to change their experience or change their offer. Those are 2 completely different ways of doing business. This one is going to win over time because it's how you're going to reach the large-scale market. It's what's happened on the desktop. So it seems like we're kidding ourselves if we think that it's not going to happen on mobile also. And I don't think it's just about screen size.
So we're going to open up for questions in a few minutes. So please start thinking about the questions you want to ask Rob, because he'll take any question.
Or Ben.
Or me. But no, Rob, please. And another thing I'd like to do, as we've got a few minutes left, given that we have such a great gathering of all the development community here, if you had to kind of pinpoint some key areas as to why, if you are today either a web developer in the PC, more fixed-centric world, or alternatively, you're very much wedded to the native world, what are the reasons you would give them to walk out of this room and go, I need to really rethink the way I'm constructing apps because web's got to be the future?
Well, I mean, so I would start with a little bit of the example that you just gave with the Facebook application, which is the distribution effect that you get from the web, right? I'm not saying, by the way, that that a powerful consumer marketplace isn't a way to monetize an application and services, but that is, in fact, right now what is fragmenting the mobile marketplace. I mean, we have our Brew and BNP marketplace, very powerful, made a lot of money for a lot of people. We're very proud of it. Over time, though, we're going to be competing head-to-head with services that are on these devices. So if you're a developer and you want to play not in the mobile space only, you really want to spread that way onto the web. It's not that I'm probably going to get out there and advocate you must do one or the other. We're at the same place we are. We talk about LT and HTTP+, and you want to handle all those physical layers, which is something we love to talk about at Qualcomm. As a developer, you want to handle this transition, right? And one of the questions is, in sort of the reverse question is, what do you need as developers to help manage that transition better and help make it so that I can do certain classes of applications on the web and have it work the way I want to? What's missing? What don't we have? Because that's what we'd like to do as a platform company, is help influence the industry and our partners and see if we can make that happen for you.
And what are you doing specifically for developers? I mean, obviously, this event is a classic example of where you're bringing people together. But why, what would be, you're selling the Qualcomm proposition. What are you bringing to the party that's different from maybe your competitors when they're trying to focus on this?
Well, I mean, in some ways, the best thing that we can do is continue to interact with you and then put those features into our devices. I mean, when we look at the penetration that we can have and the influence we can have, for example, on Android, we have great partnership with Google. They drive that key position there, but one of the things we want to do is keep pressing on things like the mobile web and other capabilities in the mobile environments. Our partnership with Microsoft, our partnership with HP Palm, all of these things intersect in a really interesting way, and that intersection and that commonality tends to be around the web. So one of the things that would be interesting for us, or one of the things we concentrate on, is try to push this envelope a little bit. What would happen if we exposed a camera API? What would happen if we added networking to JavaScript? And by the way, a lot of security problems to solve there and sort of model for that. But we need to actually try these experiments so that in a period of time we'll actually get to where we want. If people hadn't experimented with 3D or with graphics, we wouldn't have a WebGL at this point. So we want to actually drive that. So what we're trying to do with developers is actually give developers tools to do cool things, tune them, and then actually iterate on that fast enough to be meaningful.
And Paul made a big thing this morning. He had all the whiz-bang demos and everything else.
He always gets the good demos.
He brought it back home to the security piece. And you've just touched on that. But again, there's often a nervousness around the web. Is it secure? Is it a safe place to be developing solutions? How does that plug into this debate? And what are you doing to make sure that we're not going to see malicious code being pushed out and people abusing the web approach to do that?
I'm not sure the web gives you any greater or lesser threat in terms of vulnerabilities or so forth. There are a lot of people working and thinking about web security. There's different extremes that you can take it to, and how you segment your runtime, how you allow plugins. Plugins are probably the biggest security risk, in all honesty. And that's the place where, from a security standpoint, we should agree on what our application models are. We should decide, what does it mean to actually have this thing called an application that's running in this JavaScript runtime that has maybe permanence and persistent data and so forth. There are the beginnings of that in HTML5. I think we need to go a little bit further, and I think this community could actually help advise that differently than the desktop web developers would do it.
And one final thing, you've alluded to this. I guess one of the challenges here is the monetization of the web app. It's not as discrete. How do you see that playing out? Do you see different monetization models coming into play to support this approach to app development?
Yes and no. I mean, marketing is marketing, right? There's only so many ways that actually work really well. So that's why I think there's a Chrome web app store that looks an awful lot like the native application download store, because discovery and the act of purchase has a certain feel to us in this, a way we're used to interacting. On the other hand, what's the difference between a website and a free downloaded application? Right, in terms of that, if you monetize it through advertising or upselling in the application or anything like that. So if you take a Zynga-like model, you can make money in many different ways other than by the download of the bits of the application. And I think the web does that probably better than anybody. What may be missing is sort of a unified backend tied to a central billing framework. And I think people are thinking about that right now.
Good. Well, I'm going to open up now. I think we have about 4 microphones in the room. You've got a real unique opportunity now to throw questions to Rob, or alternatively, make suggestions to him as well. I can see a number of hands in the room. The lady at the back with her hand in the air, over here, please. Could you please say where you're from as well?
Is this on? Oh, Artem from Worksmart Labs from New York. Do you think that the existing players like the Apple or even Google at this point are against the web app approach a little bit as they get more and more traction for their native platforms? Because this can eliminate sort of a barrier to entry for other competitors.
I mean, you'd have to ask them if they were against it. I think there's some evidence that the web is too important. I think it really matters what's successful. Will they influence how fast adoption happens? Yes, because they control that execution environment. I think, though, that it's something that no one company would be able to stop, because it'd be like trying to unplug the internet. It'll just go around the thing that's blocking it. And I think the web's the same way.
We have a question at the back on this side, please.
He answered it.
Oh, it's already answered. Okay. Was there another one over there? No.
One over there.
Oh, there's one over here. Yes, please. Lady in red.
Hey, Galia Benartzi, I'm CEO of Particle Code. We're doing a cross-platform SDK that lets developers write both web and native apps from the same code base. It seems to me that one of the difficulties with standards like HTML5 is keeping up with sort of breakthroughs in the market, right? So whatever will be the next hardware innovation, whether it's sensors, smell sniffers, whatever will be cool, will HTML5 keep up, or will you always need to make a native app to stay on the cutting edge?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to get past the point where we have to pass a standard to expose one more capability, but in fact, we actually probably have to do a meta standard that says, this is how you extend JavaScript, or this is how you expose these device APIs. I mean, there are technologies that actually try to do that. They're not, I don't think, standardized as much. We're looking at some of those. But I think you point out something really well. So we have to build the framework for how you talk about these things and discover them. So you have to say, does this thing I'm running on have a sensor? Does it have an accelerometer? If it does, this is how I talk to it. Does it have something? Can you enumerate new interfaces? I think these are all problems that we have in the application runtime, dynamic runtime environments. We've solved them before in other places. I think we can solve them on the web too. So I hope we don't get to the place where to add every little widget, we have to actually go back to the W3C. Yeah.
But probing that a little bit more, how's that process working behind the scenes? Because presumably you can sit down with the Google guys looking at their roadmap for Android, or the OEMs in terms of what kind of innovations they have, whether it's a new sensor or whatever, and you can start plugging some of that stuff in early on to make sure that the standardization process is in place ahead of time. Right.
I mean, or we might put up a prototype that we would say, this might be a way that you would do it, and see how people feel about it, see if it meets the needs that they have. So that's something you do. I mean, there's no difference between really doing that in any large programming environment like Android or like iOS. It just depends on who writes the quote-unquote standard, whether it's a company or whether it's a consortium.
Are there any developers out there who've gone down this web apps route and have any kind of experiences they want to share or challenges that they've come across in the process? Let's see, nobody out there.
So we're still in their post-lunch.
Maybe that's it. The little blue goodie bags are too good. Yeah. They're all exhausted after working their way through the chicken sandwich.
Right here.
Here we go. Someone's point. We've got one at the back here, please. Yes, gentleman there.
Oh, and one here, too.
And one there, okay. Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Faraz Hoodboy. I'm the founder of a company called PicSense. One of the things that we do is build a platform for developers to take advantage of social networks and then start to monetize their applications through operator billing systems. And one of the things that we find that's really, really hard is to build a single application that can be monetized across a whole bunch of carriers, let alone within a single country, to be able to cover people outside of a particular network. Is there a role for Qualcomm to be filling that? Is that a role that technologies are going to fill, or is that something that payment companies are going to have to step up and fix for us? Because at the end of the day, monetization is what drives the economic incentive for all of us. If we're not able, I mean, there's not enough ad inventory for people to be monetizing their applications just through ads. And there's no collection mechanism outside of the carrier today that's acceptable to the 5 billion people who are using mobile phones today.
Right. So I think you touched on a really interesting point. It's one of those things that we associate with the mobile environment that doesn't necessarily come by default in the web application environment, sort of that connection to a billing system, right? We don't think about, because you get a PC, you get a Mac, you have it on your desk. You don't have an operator tied to that like you do with your other device that already has your credit card, and it's sort of a quote-unquote trusted way of doing it. I think there are a couple places that that's being handled. One is I think we should, in fact, think about what that might mean, but I'm not sure we need to extend JavaScript or build it into the environment, because when you're connected, you should be able to get to a service. And there are a few companies that are playing around with that kind of service, Boko being one of them, where you can say, where somebody said, I'll tie into the financial services network and I will present you with this RESTful API that will actually let you do billing, and the billing will be tied to that. Then we just really need to think about what do credentials mean in the mobile web application. I think that's the interesting problem to solve for us. How do we do that and preserve anonymity? And we're playing around with this a little bit, and a couple other people are too.
We've got time for one final question down here at the front, please.
Hello, Ido Kowalkowski from Yalaya. We're web developers, and we shifted into mobile applications doing mostly widgets. Now we're developing on many platforms that allows us to develop using JavaScript and deploy it on native applications. Now my question is, first congratulate you about seeing that you enjoy what you're doing. Congratulations. And second, we talked about the feature phones. There is a lot of market about the feature phones.
Sure.
How does this play web applications inside the feature phones? Is it Qualcomm Plaza again?
Is it a Qualcomm what?
Plaza.
Plaza? No, we're not. I'm not up here selling widgets, that's for sure. I think that if you specifically sort of asking about if I'm advocating the use of web applications, how do we hit the market that is still being served by all the what, you didn't use the word feature phone, you said something much more politically correct.
Sub $100.
Yeah, there you go.
Phone.
You look, there actually are technologies I think are coming down in the same way that we worked really hard to optimize Flash onto that tier device too. That chipset is something that you use in those or around that tier. Companies like Opera, for example, have pushed really hard to get full web functionality onto that class of devices. So while I don't see that transition happening as fast in the legacy devices that are out there, granted, huge part of the market. That's why we have Brew MP service that market. We think it's very powerful, very important part of the marketplace. But this discussion was more about where might we be years from now, a couple years from now, or next year. And I think by that time frame, the computational power you're going to have even in those lower cost segments, I think are going to actually be able to run the majority of these web applications also. So, but the proof will be in the pudding there, and we have to define things cleanly and carefully so that we don't get these big bloated runtimes that you can't put onto these environments, or you have to proxy for them to win. We don't want to go back to WAP, right? That would be a step backwards.
Great. Well, Rob, thank you very much indeed for taking the questions. And we'll be here for a little while, so if there's anyone who didn't get a question in, you want to come down the front, we're happy to have a chat. So thank you very much indeed for coming.
Great.